Now joining us, a great friend of Outsiders, Federal MP, Craig Kelly. Craig,
good morning, Rowan. Good morning.
Welcome to
Great to be here with you.
Good to see you. Now, your Parliament has finished and wrapped up, so you've got straight back to your #1 job, which is coming up with good ideas for the Outsiders show.
Very good.
So thank you very much for your hard work and your detailed, forensic looking at the speech. Today we're going to look at the speech of this Guterres bloke. Tell us about
that's right.
Guterres.
We've had the recent UN climate conference over there in Madrid. You mentioned 27,000 delegates from around the world jetting in to lecture us all on how we shouldn't fly and travel. But Guterres is the UN Secretary General. Now, this guy is a former Portuguese Prime Minister, a lifelong socialist that now is in charge of the UN. Now, he made a speech that actually opened this conference up that just contained so many falsehoods, so many incorrect statements. I don't know whether you can call them lies or not, but they are simply saying things that are not true and they should be called out.
Well, I think none better than you, Craig Kelly, to call them out. So let's go through them. Let's go through them one by one. You've identified 6 different parts of his speech. So he's the Secretary General of the United Nations. You would hope that he did some fact-checking beforehand, and you would hope that maybe the ABC and others would do the fact-checking. But no, it's Outsiders that are going to do the fact-checking, and Outsiders alone. So let's kick off, Craig, with the first false claim. We'll just play the clip to you here. Have a listen.
Climate-related natural disasters are becoming more frequent, more deadly, more destructive, with growing human and financial costs.
So, Craig, Guterres has said in front of the world that climate-related natural disasters are becoming more frequent and more deadly and more destructive with growing human and financial cost. Is he right?
Okay, firstly, in that one sentence, he's told 3 untruths. Now, let's go through them one at a time. Firstly, he said there's a greater number of deaths from climate-related disasters. Now, let's look at the evidence and the data. The data comes from the University of Louvain in Belgium. They have a thing called the International Disaster Database, where they record every disaster that happens around the world. They started in 1998. They looked back in the past and got all the records together. Now, that shows that we have the lowest number of deaths from climate-related disasters in history. There's been a 98% decline, incredible 98% decline, since the 1930s, and there is today. And this year, we're looking at the lowest number of deaths from climate-related disasters ever recorded. And that's despite the increase in population. And here you have the Secretary-General of the UN saying the exact opposite of what's true. It's hard to see you'd get a bigger lie than that.
The numbers have plummeted despite the fact that the world's population has increased substantially. So you would think when there are natural disasters, the death toll would be even greater because there's more people. Well, the question is, it is at what we talked about it with Michael Schellenberger last week, something like 98 to 99% reduction.
Now, why has that come down? That's the next question. It's come down because of greater wealth and because of the use of fossil fuels. Because we've got more concrete, more steel, we've got able to evacuate people from disaster areas when no storms are coming. That's the reason. So what he is actually planning, his policies, will actually make the situation go in the opposite direction.
Wow. Okay, so you said there were 3 errors in that one sentence.
Right. Now, the second one, he talked about the number of disasters increasing.
Yes.
Now, I'm always very hesitant when you look at the number of disasters because it's how you classify a disaster. You can easily manipulate these figures. But again, going back to that International Disaster Database, we can look since the year 2000, and you would expect the number of disasters to be relatively even, but it's actually declining. So again, what he is saying, the UN Secretary-General is saying something that is false, and the truth is the exact opposite. The number of disasters, as recorded by the most comprehensive database, shows a decline, not an increase.
And the third point? Sorry.
Oh, so I was just going to say, why do you think that he's pushing this? I mean, is it because he is mendacious and because he's a socialist and he's got a very long background here, going back to 1992 as Secretary-General of the Socialist Party in Portugal, so there's been a long time coming for him? Or is it just simply that he's taking the accepted wisdom, which would be, oh, there's got to be more natural disasters because there's more people and more stuff?
Well, there could be another thing, James. Remember, the UN is after cash. They have something like $29 billion, what they say, short. These guys fly around the world first class. They've got all these offices to maintain. They want people to throw money to them. Now, when someone makes false and misleading statements asking for cash, that is called fraud.
Absolutely, you're absolutely... Well, the fraud has only just begun. Let's go through false claim number 2.
Number 3, Ron, number 3.
Number 3, let's have a listen to this one.
We're still on the first...
Oh, yeah, sorry, we're still on the first one.
It's not his first statement, you forget.
Number 3 of the first one.
It's not easy to make 3 misleading claims in the one statement. He also talked about... His claim was that the cost of disasters is increasing. So the cost from climate-related disasters, cyclones, floods, droughts, like is increasing. Now, again, you have to look at the data. The data comes from the insurance companies that keep this. Now, what you've got to be careful when you're measuring this, you can't measure the cost of a disaster today, which say was $1 million, and say, oh, something was 500,000 before, and say the cost has increased. You've got to look at the cost of what's happened with inflation. You've got to look at GDP, you've got to look at economic growth. You've got to look, are we putting more assets in the way of danger, where you're building new cities and cities are expanding? Now, when you take all those things into consideration, a guy called Roger Pilecki has done this research, he's looked at it, and he's measured it as a percentage of GDP. So climate-related disasters as a percentage of GDP. Surprise, surprise, they're going down. The exact opposite of what the UN Secretary-General is saying, which is the whole basis of this climate conference over in Madrid.
So that's our first sentence. We've had 3 provable errors in that very first sentence. Let's go to his second sentence. Have a listen.
Every year, air pollution associated to climate change kills 7 million people. Climate change has become a dramatic threat to human health and to human security.
Look, I think this is one of the most insidious lies. Even the mild-mannered Bjorn Lomborg has said this statement is completely dishonest. Now, if you look at the data, again, the data from the World Health Organization, not sort of made up by, some two-bit organisation, the World Health Organization say, yes, 7 million people have died from air pollution. But more than half of them, something like 4.4 million, have died from indoor air pollution. These are people that don't have baseload electricity connected to their homes, and they cook and they heat their homes burning renewables of dung, crop waste and wood. That's 4.3 million deaths annually. Now, when he makes that false statement and implies this is all climate-related, the danger he does, that he traps those people in poverty, he denies them from having the opportunity to get connected to baseload power, and that results in millions of deaths.
He's condemning them to death.
That's why this statement needs to be called out, not only because it's wrong, because it leads to millions of people dying every year.
Wow. I mean, that is serious.
What I don't understand is why don't we have anybody in the media who has got the guts to to call out these nonsense? Because we've seen this speech reported uncritically in all media outlets, and I can be sure that Paul Barry is not going to be fact-checking.
Monday, you watch. Let's go on. We've got lots more. False claim number 3. Have a listen.
Number 4, up to number...
We simply have to stop digging and drilling and take advantage of the vast possibilities offered by renewable energy and nature-based solutions.
Really? Does this guy think wind turbines and solar panels are made by the fairies? You've got to dig and you've got to drill to get the raw materials to build solar panels and wind turbines and big batteries. A wind turbine, one wind turbine alone, you need 220 tonnes, not 220 kilos, 220 tonnes of coking coal to produce one wind turbine. Wow. You need petrochemicals to make the resin turbine blades. You need the machine oil to run the gearbox. You need boron. You need a whole lot of other rare earth minerals that you need to dig up. Then you've got your cobalt that you need for your batteries. So the idea that you can somehow stop digging and drilling, firstly, it's an insult to all those people that work in the oil, gas and petroleum industries and the coal industries. It's an insult to the work they do, and it's failing to acknowledge how the fossil fuels have decreased poverty and led to longer life expectancies throughout the world.
Tell us about the oceans. Tell us about his claim about the oceans.
One of his other great claims, this Guterres, UN Secretary-General, is all the oceans, the sea levels are rising, we're all going to drown. Now, again, the peer-reviewed science shows that the islands that Guterres went to and pretended and told them that they were all going to drown underwater shows they're actually increasing in size. The majority of islands that are threatened by so-called rising sea levels are actually increasing in size. And the latest peer-reviewed science, Professor Kench from the University of Auckland has said these islands will be suitable for habitation for the next century and onwards.
Wow. Yes.
That's the peer review.
So they're standing with a hand out for cash, saying, give us some cash, give us some cash. We've got all the lovies running around in tears, thinking that the islands are sinking. Have a look at Bondi Beach here, Craig. I think this is one of your happy snaps at Bondi Beach.
Yeah, perhaps the other week we had all the crazy climate protesters out at Bondi Beach. But if you look at the photographs through Bondi Beach, taken in exactly the same place, going back to the 1980s, going back to 1910, even going back to the 1880s. I think there's one coming up in the 1880s. You can see Bondi Beach undeveloped. There's no change in the sea level. And for those that say, it's trick photography, just go around and look at the tide gauge at Fort Denison around the corner. And that tide gauge shows there's been only a minuscule increase over the past century. And in fact, today, the sea levels are lower than what they were many times in the past, according to the tide gauges at Fort Denison.
And there's a report, James, that the Maldives are building 5 new resorts and airports or something or other, which technically should be underwater. because we were told, guaranteed.
Here we have a great picture. This resort is a brand new resort opened in the Maldives this week. So as Guterres was making this speech, here was this island, this new island resort opening in the Maldives. You know, 150 new rooms, hotel rooms on an island resort, opening the very same day Guterres is making this speech about sea level rise.
Why is the Australian government handing over hundreds of millions of dollars to these Pacific nations? And how much did we just give Tuvalu, who stood there after we signed this massive cheque and really said some appalling stuff about our country and praised China?
Look, we're happy to help our Pacific neighbours in certain ways. Now, what we should have been doing, this is where this false news and the false reporting and the misleading and incorrect statements by Guterres count. Because we've seen in the Solomon Islands, we've seen 60-something kids die from measles.
Yep.
Guterres, instead of when he went over there to the Pacific Islands, instead of making all these fake news and putting these stunts about sea level rise, he should have been over there talking about the importance of immunising children. Absolutely. That would have reduced deaths. Instead, he's over there grandstanding, telling untruths, instead of working on what's important.
Craig Kelly, so great to have you on Outsiders. And your electorate, remind us where your electorate is and who...
My electorate is the beautiful electorate of Hughes down in southern Sydney, a bit of the Sutherland Shire, and also the Army Barracks around Holsworthy in the great suburb of Wattle Grove and Hammondville.
They're very lucky people to have you there, and so is the Australian Parliament. Lucky to have Craig Kelly in there. Craig, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Rita.
Craig.
We've got lots